Because you were part of a healthcare summit this week that President Obama convened. Here was President Obama speaking at that summit.
Nothing is harder in politics than doing something now that costs money in order to gain benefits 20 years from now. It's the single hardest thing to do in politics, and that's part of the reason why healthcare reform has consistently broken down.
And Mr. Donahue, you were at this summit. There's been something of an evolution at the Chamber of Commerce. You were at this summit saying you support the president's goals. You believe we can get something done this year.
Well, what I did say is in comparison to the previous big debates on health care, all of the parties are somewhere else. For the longest period of time, you knew where big business, small business, the docs, the hospitals, now they're all over the place. And they are for a very simple reason, is that health care has become not only very expensive, but very complicated and very much driven more and more by the government, who are, engaged with 45% of paying for what's going on in the healthcare business. So I do believe there is a sentiment of willingness to listen and willingness to see what we can work out here. Of course, that'll fall apart at one point when everybody finds out where their car happens to be parked. But we're going to participate in this debate and listen. There are things we all agree to. We have to do wellness. I mean, what's going on with young people in this country is crazy. We have to do IT. It's the only industry.
Information technology.
Yes, 16% of the economy, and it's the only industry that basically doesn't use it. We have to do things about getting those people covered who are not. Everybody talks about 49 million people not covered. A third of them could be covered tomorrow if we took them by the hand and signed them into the programs that are available. A third of them can't be covered, and we have to do something about that. So there are many things we can find common ground on.
But does that mean, for example, that business is ready to sign on to a requirement to provide health care to all the employees?
Well, I don't know that that's going to come around at this time. See, there is a basic issue here that's more fundamental as we look at healthcare, as we look at CO2, as we look at what we're doing in labor. We're trying to hold this economy together. This president, who we need to make sure he succeeds. I mean, this country has to succeed. But he wants to put more things, one on top of the other, faster than I think we can assimilate it. I'm prepared to bring the business community to a legitimate discussion on healthcare. I'm prepared to bring them to a discussion on CO2. But if we jam all this stuff at once, if you look at what's going up on regulation, on taxes, on cost, you see that job number and those job pictures, it'll be worse. So let's do it in an orderly fashion.
Senator McCaskill, he does bring up an important point on revenues and timing here. And from what I could tell this week in my reporting, talking to Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill, it was almost impossible to find anyone who would support the president's plans to pay for this health care by shaving the deductions for wealthy Americans.
But he gets credit for saying he's going to pay for it and laying out a plan to pay for it. I mean, we did Medicare D, and Bush lobbied for it and gleefully signed it into law with not any way of paying for it. No means test. Billions of dollars into the pockets of the pharmaceutical companies, the insurance companies, without a second thought of public money. So I think the fact that this president is showing the discipline to say, first of all, we're going to have an honest budget, no more cooking the books. We're going to put all of the stuff on the budget so the American people know how serious the problem is. And the fact that he's committed to paying for the way we get health care reform.
But can you sign on to the plan, for example, to shave the deductions for wealthy Americans to pay for this?
We're talking about somebody who makes $4 million a year, instead of getting a $350 deduction on a $1,000 contribution, getting a $280 deduction on a $1,000 contribution. Does that really sound like something really tough?
That's a fundamentally different issue than the question that George asked about the tax rates. The issue of shaving the deduction for people that are, at this time, in this economy, from people that are putting money willingly and voluntarily into the needs of others is not going to fly. It's dead on arrival.
You agree with that?
Well, first, I think the president is confronted with a lot of these things simultaneously because the world has confronted him with them. He didn't ask to have to deal with a recession and the global warming and the healthcare crisis. He's been confronted with that, so he has to deal with a lot of these things. With regard to budgeting, I think Claire's right. At least we remember Vice President Cheney George said deficits didn't matter, and they pretty quickly took the largest budget surplus in history and turned it into the largest deficit. Now we have a president who wants to get the deficit down. I think we need to go through a progression on health care. First, look for ways to economize within the healthcare system by just looking at the way we practice medicine in different parts of the country. There's a lot of money to be saved. That's number one. Secondly, maybe there's some other parts of the budget that we can economize to help pay for some of this. That's why I'm opposing the omnibus. $250 billion over 10 years, that's real money by just tightening our belts for 1 year. And then finally, the issue of revenues may have to be addressed, but I think you have to do that last, not first. And the question is, do we extend with additional tax cuts to the most affluent among us? Perhaps that's something that has to be put on the table.
But you say do it last, not first. If you don't have the reserve fund in there, can you really make the upfront investments you need to make in healthcare? For example, building on what the president did in the stimulus package on information technology.
By that, George, I mean the president was right to put that issue on the table, but I think we as Congress first have to see what else can be done to get the revenue, and then only raise the issue of whether you raise taxes last, not first.
What can you and your Republican colleagues sign on to here?
Well, I think that what we've got to do is straighten up the economy first. We got to go to the banking. That will help. If we take on all these programs, this country's going to be in one heck of an economic mess.
So put off any discussion of health care this year?
Well, I think we can discuss it, but how are we going to fund it?
So you're for no revenue increase. The president says he's not going to have the revenue increases in 2011, but you're saying not even debate it
Well,
now?
I think we're going to debate it. We debate it every day. But we should be careful on what we're doing. Let's do not push this economy and the jobs losses even further down.
How do you address this question, Senator McCaskill, of scale? And both Mr. Donahue and Senator Shelby have talked about and priorities. You say the president didn't choose to put himself in this position, but is it appropriate at this point to scale back and say, first things first, let's focus on the banks, let's focus on this job situation?
I think the American people fundamentally understand that he's focusing on the economy first and foremost. I think there is some confusion. Things happen quickly. Obviously, the TARP situation was an emergency, and it was frankly, it was a remarkable moment when I saw the candidates for both parties come together on that, realizing we had a crisis of liquidity. I think he's going to continue to focus on the economy. On the other hand, George, as Evan said, he's a great communicator. And I think the American people know that if we keep delaying the health care discussion, if we keep delaying the cap and trade discussion and the discussion about our environment and global warming, that is a very, very bad thing for our grandchildren. And also, we have to keep focused on deficit reduction. But what you're seeing is a president that's not afraid to take on all the issues that he knows the American people wants reform. They want reform on this. So it's tough. We got to communicate clearly. We got to make sure that we bring the American people with us. But I think we've got the right communicator to do it.
He's got to try and do two things simultaneously, George. First, be an idealist, look at the problems that face the country and propose bold changes to deal with those. He's doing that. But at the end of the day, he also has to be a pragmatist. And you can't insist on more than the system can deliver, although you push for all that it can deliver. And my sense of this president is that he's a very practical person. He wants results. And at the end of the day, that's what we'll deliver.
I think we have to be very careful not to overload the economy. Our thrust should be turning the economy around, and we do that through banks, getting people back to work.
Another issue that's going to come up before the end of this year, and we only have a couple of minutes left. Mr. Donahue, you're going to spend about $10 million, I've read, to try to defeat this Employee Free Choice Act, which would give unions the ability to organize at a plant if they could get a majority of people at the plant to sign up. And Senator McCaskill, let me bring you in on this. Is there anything you can say, you believe right now, that will convince Mr. Donahue to back off that? And do you have the votes to get this done this year?
I'm not sure that we have the votes, and I have no hope of backing Mr. Donahue off. I would say that I think it would be fair that we have a secret ballot for decertification of unions. Right now, businesses can go with a card check. There is no secret ballot to get rid of a union, but there is a requirement of that for people to be able to organize. And to me, that seems unfair. Let's what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Let's put people on a level playing field and have both businesses have to have a secret ballot to decertify. Until they do that, I'm not sure they got a lot of room to complain.
You get the last word.
That is another, the loss of the secret ballot and the 16 other issues the labor unions want is another weight on this economy. What we need is a defibrillator that shocks this economy back into positive action. This president, this Congress, and the business community have to talk about positive things and a bright future. We need to stop letting everybody watch the president and all of us talk this economy into the can. Watch the market. The market goes down, liquidity goes down. We have a real challenge here, and we ought to seize it.